In modern times, we take for granted the ability to easily prove our own identity with things like driver's licenses, social security numbers, birth certificates, and all kinds of other products of our bureaucratic states. Yet even still, there are plenty of scams out there for falsifying one's own information, stealing other people's information, and impersonating them for malicious means. This all got me thinking, how on earth did people in the past prove their identity, and just how common was the issue of identity theft? Let's find out. It takes a lot of reading to make these documentaries. This leaves me with very little time to actually get through my growing library or explore other subjects of interest. I'm sure in your own busy life, it can be tough to do all the reading you'd like to. Thankfully, our sponsor Blinkist has a solution. Blinkist is an app that takes thousands of nonfiction books and uses experts to distill them down to their most essential ideas for you to easily digest with text or audio in just 15 minutes. It's a great tool for accessing thousands of titles and 27 categories of subjects to quickly broaden your horizons and decide which books you definitely want to read in full. As an example, the sort of questions I was asking in this video led me to the fantastic A Short History of Nearly Everything, which takes you on an engaging and entertaining journey through the realms of human knowledge. Hooked, I then had to listen to the Stoic philosophy of Marcus Aurelius while out on my daily dog walk. It's honestly been a really helpful app that I'd highly recommend. You can check it out right now by clicking the link in the description below to get a 7-day free trial. In addition, the first 100 people will get 25% off a full membership. Enjoy! We can start by looking at the reasons why you might need to prove your identity in the first place. Well, just as today, in all but the smallest, most insular communities, people in the past weren't merely engaging in face-to-face interactions with folks they were already well acquainted with. Rather, they were constantly interacting with folks they didn't know well, and often doing so from great distances. Such social activities, therefore, required some foundation on which both parties could come to terms. This might merely be a matter of trust, but more often than not, involved some degree of certification. Common ideas necessitating some proof of one's identity involved property claims, debts, business transactions, the managing of affairs remotely, partaking in legal activities, claiming an inheritance, adopting a family member, getting married, the list goes on and on. But perhaps one of the most important reasons why you would want to prove your identity was to claim the benefits of citizenship. For many groups across antiquity, the definition of who could be a citizen was paramount to the maintenance of the social order as it dictated the rights and responsibilities of individuals throughout society. Really, the bedrock of just about any civilization. Let's now focus in on this concept before moving on. Perhaps the best illustration of the stakes at play here is to look at the highly stratified Spartan society, where its citizens lorded over its non-citizens in an extremely authoritarian manner. These Spartiates were assigned an allotment of public lands and helots, could participate in politics, and were granted all kinds of legal protections. At the same time though, they had to pay dues of food and drink, were barred from taking up a trade, and were subject to a variety of military obligations. Athenian citizens were similarly given the right to own land, own slaves, vote, and enter government. They were also subject to various civil and military duties. We see this sort of thing repeat itself across the ancient world. Almost universally, being a part of this citizenship club meant being a free, adult male with citizen parentage. Carthage, for instance, seems to have had a two-tiered citizenship. The higher tier, made up of those descended from existing citizens, had full rights, while the second tier, probably made up of the newly enfranchised like former slaves, had restricted rights. It's interesting to note here that genealogically speaking, these full Punic citizens appear to have only had to trace their descent from a single citizen parent, who might have otherwise married a foreigner. This is to be contrasted with other communities that required descent from parents who both had citizenship. The specific mechanisms which governed who was or was not a citizen had a huge impact on the development of a society over time. Gatekeep too hard, and you could find that pool of citizens rapidly depleted, as would happen in Sparta. It's for this reason that many communities would evolve their citizenship requirements over time. Perhaps the best example of this is ancient Rome. Originally, Rome functioned much like the other small city-states at the time, with a closed citizen group that could trace descent from the original inhabitants of the city. Over the years, however, as Rome expanded, it was forced to revise this idea. Early on, during the Republican period for instance, when Rome absorbed members of the Latin League and began to establish colonies further afield, they developed a legal separation between Roman and Latin citizenship. The former enjoyed the following key rights: the right to hold property, make legal contracts, marry lawfully, act as the paterfamilias, vote in the assemblies, run for office, go to trial and appeal, to sue or to be sued, to gain protection from certain laws, to be exempted from some taxes, and the list goes on. As you can see, it's quite the enticing benefits package. Latin citizens, meanwhile, had rights within their own communities, but when it came to matters with Rome, they could access only a subset of rights, which might vary from place to place based upon the deal that had been struck upon their absorption into the Roman conglomerate. These often included the right to trade, to legally marry, to vote if they moved to Rome, to maintain rights if they relocated within Italy, and more. The benefits of full citizenship was clear to all, and was actually used as a carrot by Romans to bring others into the fold of their growing empire. Citizenship, for example, could be granted to individuals, a local aristocracy, a city, a series of communities, and entire regions. But for some, these rights were doled out far too sparingly. Rome's Italian allies, for instance, were constantly clamoring for expanded citizenship, since they often bore the brunt of its military obligations without receiving the full benefits enjoyed by the minority of Rome. This tension eventually came to a head in 91 BC during the Social War, when huge numbers of Italian cities rose up in rebellion. It was a bloody affair, and though Rome eventually won, it conceded citizenship rights to the entire peninsula. Moving forward, you would see additional provinces be granted citizenship like Cisalpine Gaul in 49 BC. The franchise was being rolled out further and further, with a major path to citizenship being tied to military service in the ranks of the auxiliary. Eventually, in 212 AD, the Edict of Caracalla went all the way in on the idea of universal citizenship, extending Roman citizenship to all freeborn men throughout the empire, while also granting all freeborn women the same rights as Roman women. I could go on and on about this topic, but for now, I think we've sufficiently illustrated why being able to prove your identity would be so critical in accessing the benefits of citizenship. So now let's move on to how you would actually go about proving your identity. At the most basic level, this would be built merely on trust. You could just declare it and hope others believed you. For instance, the Apostle Paul is said to have claimed citizenship several times to get he and his fellow travelers out of sticky situations. Here's a relevant passage from Acts, quote, "But when they had stretched him out for the whips, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, 'Is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned?' When the centurion heard this, he went to the tribune and said to him, 'What are you about to do? For this man is a Roman citizen.' So the tribune came and said to him, 'Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?' And he said, 'Yes.' The tribune answered, 'I bought this citizenship for a large sum.' Paul said, 'But I am a citizen by birth.' So those who were about to examine him withdrew from him immediately, and the tribune was also afraid, for he realized that Paul was a Roman citizen, and that he had bound him. Now it seems a bit absurd to think that all of this took place on a single man's word. However, we should keep in mind that there were likely other social clues to back up such claims, like the ability to speak Latin, the use of the Tria Nomina naming convention, or other displays of wealth or status. There is also the principle at work here that the level of evidence required was generally proportional to the claims being made. Want some overly aggressive guards to back off a bit? No problem, confidence can do the trick. Want to bring matters to court though, and you'd have to do better than that. This next level of proof might involve having people vouch for you. Of course I'm Paul, the Roman citizen. Here's my friend who says so too. Understandably, this still might not be convincing enough, and so you'd have to bring better ammunition in the form of higher quantity or quality of backers. Obviously, the more prestigious the advocate, the more trusted their word. We see this sort of thing play out a lot in the Roman world when it came to using letters of recommendation for career advancement. One interesting transcript we have from ancient Egypt records how a Flavius Longus was able to bring several witnesses, including a veteran, to swear to his status as a free citizen in order to serve in the 3rd Legio Cyrenaica. Another layer of information that could be used to prove one's identity would be to produce a physical object known to be associated with you. One of the most common types of objects would be that of an official seal. This was used by magistrates and business folk for millennia. In fact, Some of our earliest evidence dates back to ancient Sumeria. The way this worked is that you would basically have a custom design that was tied to your identity and which was difficult to replicate. The seal itself might be shown, or more likely, its imprint shown. This could be used to leave a mark directly on a document to authenticate it, or it might be stamped on wax or clay that helped encapsulate a container. In this way, the recipient could not only be sure who it came from, but also observe that the contents had not been altered. The same sort of thing seems to have been achieved with other forms of markings, like fingerprints, handprints, and signatures. We even have some documents where the signers are physically described within, including age, sex, physical features, and all. Another physical proof of ID would be the citizenship rolls maintained by ancient governments. For instance, in Greece, we know that these lists were important for the regulation of citizenship and the summoning of levy forces. In Sparta, this was extremely important, given the quite strict approach to citizenship we discussed previously. Unfortunately, we don't know much of what this actually looked like. Some insight though can be gleaned by turning to Athens. Here, we learn that the reforms of Cleisthenes in 508 BC required each demos, basically the equivalent of a suburb, to maintain its own citizen rolls. Parents living in these areas likely had to register their child with the local demarch shortly after birth. Later, when male children turned 18, they would return to have them officially registered as citizens. Should the documents be lost or other problems arise, the matter would pass through the courts to have the citizen rolls properly corrected. A similar process occurred in Rome. Here, the citizens were enrolled on the tribal lists with information concerning their full name, their father's name, and the name of their voting tribe. Such lists were updated and revised every 5 years under the direction of the elected censor. It's at this point that individuals might be stricken from the record or added to it. Early on, this list was kept in Rome, but as more communities came into the fold, these too would be expected to maintain their own lists. When it came to the provinces, Roman governors or local administrators took on this responsibility. These lists were important sources of ID verification, but suffered the problem of being rather inaccessible and being often out of date. It's for this reason that the whole process of becoming a citizen not only involved a list, but also the issuing of an official document, sort of like a modern birth certificate. Roman parents, for instance, who had accepted a newborn, would register the child with officials within 30 days of the birth. Proof of their own identity as a citizen was brought, and 7 witnesses were summoned. Once everything was checked out, the birth certificate was created. It was a wooden diptych with wax surfaces. In it would be written the date of birth, the names of the witnesses, and an abbreviation indicating the possession of Roman citizenship. You didn't necessarily have to have one of these to be a citizen, but it was certainly quite handy. A similar process occurred in the provinces, where parents would register a child by making a profession, providing witnesses, and getting added to the register of declarations. They too would also be issued a birth certificate in the form of a diptych. Another type of identification was issued to auxiliaries when they were granted their citizenship at the end of the required service period. This would take the form of a bronze military diploma. Fraud prevention was included that involved the signing of 7 witnesses and the use of a special seal. The bearer would then have to take the diploma to a Roman official who would authenticate it and enroll the new citizen on their lists. Taken together, you can hopefully see how one might go about layering types of evidence to prove one's identity. However, just as today, there were always ways to cheat the system in order to falsify one's identity. Let's now explore this idea. The simplest way to try and cheat the system would be to prey off people's trust. As we stated, for a lot of low-stakes activities, you could get away with proving your identity with just your own word or that of a few others. Lying confidently could therefore be one way to bluff your way through. To discourage such practices though, many communities imposed heavy penalties on anyone who had been found to have lied about things like citizenship. The Romans in particular might have even executed you for such a transgression. In addition to the threat of punishment, there would also be layers of verification required for more important matters to improve security. As we mentioned, this might include providing testimony, seals, records, birth certificates, and more. These of course were not foolproof and could be hacked. For example, we know that in the Second Punic War, Hannibal actually stole the seals of Roman officials and used these to cause all kinds of chaos with falsified letters. It might also be possible to just bribe your way into things like the citizenship roles. This seems to have been a problem in Rome, as we know that in 95 BC, the Lex Licinia Mucia was specifically passed to remove people from the Roman and Latin citizenship roles who had falsely claimed their status. Another way to achieve false identification would be to do so by getting a lawyer to advocate your case. While we don't have explicit evidence of this happening as a way to lie, we do know that Roman attorneys were often arguing on behalf of clients seeking to prove their cases for citizenship in court. Cicero famously took the stand for the poet Aulus Licinius Archias, who had recently moved to Rome. In court, it was shown that prior to the move, Archias had been a citizen of Heraclea in southern Italy by way of witnesses, testaments of an ambassador, and public documents. This in turn allowed Cicero to argue that because Heraclea was a Roman ally, the Lex Plautia Papiria meant its citizens were now Roman citizens too. After all this legalese, he then basically went on to state that even if none of this were the case, Archias should be allowed to be a citizen anyway because he was such a great poet and Rome was lucky to have him. As for any crazy cases of identity theft where someone literally swooped in and stole an individual's life out from under them, I could not find records of this from antiquity. I did however find some instances from the later medieval period that get close to this, but such stories will have to be shared in another video. For now, I wanted to wrap up by admiring just how much more sophisticated the ancient world was than I gave it credit for when I first started the research for this episode. I hope that this video has proven both entertaining and educational in this regard. A big thanks to the patrons for sponsoring the channel, and to the researchers, writers, and artists who made this episode possible. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and check out these related videos. See you in the next one.